Okay, welcome to Into the Channel podcast, primarily about women's football. Before we hit the pitch, if you enjoy the show or love women's football as much as your boys do, come rock with us already. Subscribe or follow YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you like to watch or listen. Comments, ratings, reviews, scorching hot takes, all of them always appreciated. At ITC_pod on X, at Into the Channel pod on Threads. I am your host, Dino De Cespedes, and as always, we are joined by my co-host, Mr. Grant Engel. What is up, man?
I'm doing all right, buddy. That sure was something we watched yesterday. I'm very interested to hear how you absorbed it all.
Well, I absorbed it a little bit better than those jerseys absorbed the torrential rain. That's for sure.
Yeah.
To be honest, once I got past the farcical nature of just them playing a match in those conditions, I kind of did settle into kind of watching the football in the second half. But it just sucked so much joy out of like what should have been a really awesome moment and game. And like it didn't seem like the field was that jacked up. Brazil, Mexico,
Yep.
It just got worse from there. But what are you going to do?
All you can do is crack a beer ski and try to enjoy the football. But we are going to talk about some of those conditions. But I'll let you hit the proper intro first.
Appreciate that. So CONCACAF W Gold Cup coming to a close here on Sunday night. Congratulations to Brazil. Congratulations to the U.S. Women's National Team for being the last two teams standing in this competition. Probably still drying themselves off, but they're standing nonetheless. We will also preview the final, USA versus Brazil. That one's going down Sunday night. We're also going to go into the news, including an almost transfer fee record in the women's game. Another day, another Copper Queen out here just making history. What else is new? We've got some broad news coming up. We got to talk about an incredible Kika Nazareth goal as she rounds back into form with Benfica. We'll talk about Ajax's big win over league leaders FC Twente. And I'm excited to share that your boy did a little reporting this week. When asked about what the vibes were like at Ajax right now, according to one of my inside sources close to the team, they are, and I quote, good vibes all around, end quote. Chelsea, you are on notice, Mr. Grant Engel. Where you want to get started this week?
Look at Scoop over here. I've never been happier to be your partner in this podcast, buddy. That's fantastic. All right, so where should we start? Let's brave the elements. As only two hard-nosed, tough guy podcasters could possibly do, we will start we will start with the waterlogged USA-Canada match.
Let's go.
So I'm just going to get this out of the way early. I don't want to be a downer. I don't want to be a wet blanket, if you will. Nice. I mean, we're just the water jokes. Come on, man. They're writing themselves at this point. But I was just going to be honest. I hated this game, especially at first. I didn't allow myself to tweet during the game because I had kind of a shitty attitude, to be completely honest. Here are the first couple lines of my notes, quoting myself here. The field is a fucking disgrace. There's no reason to be playing this match. It's not safe. It's barely even football out there.
Yeah.
I continued. The ball dies at Rodman's feet on a breakaway. I hate this shit. Nothing about this is cool. So,
amen.
I'm glad I did, I'm glad I had my little self-imposed Twitter ban. Like I don't like to sound irate on social media. I try not to sound irate on this podcast. We're talking about sports. But as folks who watch this podcast know, I'm a union representative. I'm an organizer. I work with working class people. And some of them do kind of tricky jobs that can be dangerous at times. The element of danger in a profession like that requires sanctions and training and regulations and safety harnesses and things like that.
Sure.
It was fucking dangerous to be on that field.
Yeah.
We're talking about a sport that is actively living through an ACL injury crisis. So why on earth would you put players out there to risk that kind of injury? There was a recent article in Sky Sports written by Laura Hunter, published on February 20th. I hope people go check it out online. She cites in that article that around somewhere between 25 and 30, because you never know who's going to make a World Cup roster, but somewhere around 25 to 30 players missed the World Cup just because of ACL injuries.
Crazy.
They also cite in that article, and it's partly studies, partially news reports from all the leagues around the world. It's hard to put an exact number on this, especially because a lot of the studies are still in the early stages. But it mentions that they are estimating somewhere around more than 195 players from the elite women's leagues around the world have suffered ACL injuries in the last 18 months alone. So nearly 200 players in 18 months. So I'm not going to belabor this too much. There are more qualified people to talk about it. I saw a brief clip, and just total full disclosure, I try not to watch too much other stuff before Dino and I record this pod, so I'm not just regurgitating Sam Mewis's points, because Sam Mewis, is a World Cup champion and knows a lot more than I do. So I'm just not trying to, I try to give my own perspective on this. I can't wait to go seek out what she said about it. She's more qualified to talk about it. I'll just say the game as a whole was uncomfortable to watch, especially in that first half.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people bear responsibility for that. And it starts with the federations, and it starts with the people who are organizing the matches. And again, like I say, I'm a labor organizer. I turn everything into a labor fight at times. But I know to the marrow of my bones that people looked at each other and said, we already sold the ads. We already sold the tickets. People already started buying the concessions. And I think that's horseshit, because you put those people out there on the field, you put them in danger with that.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, ACLs definitely, you don't want to see that, but I mean, somebody could have drowned out there. Independent of the god-awful conditions, which both teams were up against, right. To get back to the football, I thought Canada, at the very least, looked every bit as good as the U.S. They had the slight edge in possession, 54-46. The U.S. had a slight edge in shots on target, 4-3, and a bigger edge on total shots, 7-4. There was a graphic that went up late in the match that showed that Canada had completed 100 or 150 more passes than the U.S. They obviously were employing a different game plan, but I thought they looked super solid. Now, the game flips, obviously, on the Vanessa Gilles back pass.
Yeah.
My big issue with this whole sequence is, watching the game, it was pretty clear that somebody was going to get fucked by the field conditions.
Yep.
Without everyone having recalibrated. Because I think watching those first 10 minutes, one of the first thoughts I had watching it was like, the first team that figures out how to pass the ball and figures out the conditions is going to have a big time advantage. But it turns out that it was even more extreme than that, that not figuring out the conditions could cost your team a goal, right? And actually, the first goal was going to come in this way, one way or the other. So it's almost a 2-goal swing. So Vanessa Gilles, she hits that back pass like she's done probably thousands or tens of thousands of times. And the ball dies. Credit to Jaden Shaw. She's on it. She's watching it. She hits the turbo. And then the finish, I mean, fucking incredible. Props to her. That's an absolutely earned goal. But we can't really overlook the fact that that could have happened to Girma or Davidson. It could have happened to any player on the field, just making that same pass. So somebody was going to learn that lesson the hard way. Just happened to be Canada. And I very much did not appreciate all of the Monday morning quarterbacking on that issue. I think Lori Lindsay specifically, watching the replay, she's like, sometimes you just have to clear it out. And I'm like, yeah, it's pretty easy to say once you see that it actually happened. But it was impossible to know that. The people that were recapping the first half on the halftime telecast had the same thought. And I'm just like, guys, I mean, there's no way to know until that happens. And then you saw, as soon as it happens to Gilles, everybody's just kicking it straight out of bounds immediately. Somebody had to learn that lesson. Unfortunately, it was Canada. Tough break for them, but still a lot of football left to be played in this one.
I think the point you raise, and I just totally agree with you here, is in hindsight, it's easy to say, well, the first 20 minutes provided all the evidence you need that you needed to start clearing it out. But to your point, nobody really started just clearing everything out to the sidelines until that happened.
Yep.
And I think the other point you made is that Gilles has made that pass instinctively. It is in her brain. Pass that back to the keeper, and the keeper knocks it out. And the keeper gets control and then can get a pass to somebody out wide. That's almost an instinct. That's a reaction. That's hitting your knee with the little hammer and your leg kicks out. So for that to happen, what you had mentioned earlier, you got to give a lot of credit to Shaw, because how many times has Shaw been running onto a defender knowing they're just going to play it back to the keeper and the keeper's going to blast it out? And Shaw had the presence of mind to, like you said, hit that fucking turbo and get out there. And I think the touch, to the point you made, the shitty conditions make that an even better touch, the little flick over the keeper to score it. So excellent play by Shaw. It's a fluky play. all around, really, because of the conditions. And speaking of kind of fluky, I feel like, and I think we're probably going to say this a few times, it's hard to take a lot of data from this match because of how horrendous the conditions were. But I do think it is important because I think after that goal, it was just everybody sloshing around in the fucking puddles for another 20 minutes. But I do think we should mention after halftime, 49th minute, Tierna Davidson made a foul that was obviously a penalty. That should very clearly, she was late to the challenge, and she stamped on Jesse Fleming's foot inside of the 18, and it didn't even get a VAR. And they showed the replay, and I thought that they were going to go to the VAR. Chris Whittingham on the broadcast is like, they're not going to look at this. And I was like, okay, not bad for USA.
Yeah, maybe a little home cooking. What I really appreciated, spoiler alert, this one went to penalty kicks. But I think what I really appreciated was that, these were two pretty even teams that at the end of 120 minutes happened to land on an even score line. So that at least, and nobody got injured to my knowledge. So that at least was an okay outcome. I'm like, okay, the game wasn't lost on some bullshit because they're fucking playing in the Everglades. And I think for as much flack as we give the idea of ending a knockout stage game with penalty kicks, felt pretty right in this situation.
Sure. I think that's fair.
Either way, 82nd minute, Canada makes it happen. And credit to Leon. They sort of figured out the passing at this point in the game. Field conditions improved a little bit. That was good to see. She finds Ashley Lawrence off to the right. She gets it back into Jordan Huitema, who coming back left. Her finish there, fucking genius. We talked about it a little bit before the show. She's still a young player, but, obviously up and down. I didn't think she had the best World Cup. I kind of felt pretty happy for her to kind of get this goal in a huge spot. And then also seeing Nair flying the completely wrong direction. I couldn't help but get reminded of like late 90s and one mixtape where someone just gets crossed over into oblivion. Very clean finish. And Canada was pumped at that point.
Yeah, the Seattle Reign is going to need some of those from Huitema this season. And you're right. Mm-hmm. Brilliant finish. As the cliche goes, she sent the header back where it came from, had Nair completely fooled. Smart touch. And, I was thinking about it too when you're right, like the conditions kind of started to clear up a little bit as the rain slowed down. I think it stopped in spots. The field was draining a little bit. They tried to squeegee some off during halftime. But
it was so ridiculous.
It's just insane. One thing I was considering too is like when you're trying to plant to like launch yourself for a header, that seemed like it was a tricky proposition in spots too. So a lot of credit to Huitema for just the pure athleticism there.
100%. Yeah, credit to everyone who touched the field yesterday because that took some bravery. And it was 120 minutes played by 11 players on each side. They all really left it all on the field. They're professional, best in the world type players. And I think they really showed it last night.
For sure. And speaking of getting to those 120 minutes, I think we should talk about the subs a little bit. I liked Twyla Kilcore's game plan here. I'll get to everybody in order, but I'm just going to start by saying I think Rose Lavelle was pretty close to the best player on the field as soon as she came on in the 72nd minute. Mm-hmm. But I want to talk about all the subs. So Lynn Williams came on for Shaw at halftime, and Lynn Williams was excellent. She was chasing the ball down the field, creating pressure from Jump Street. Like, it didn't look like the field conditions were affecting her at all. Maybe we need to give some credit to the equipment managers getting the right sets of spikes out there. Her traction looked A-okay out there.
Team effort.
Hell yeah. Casey Kruger on for Neiswanger at halftime. I was a little confused about this because I like Neiswanger and I think she's a great player, but Kruger is reliable, strong, smart as a defender. She's a good veteran. And although I was confused by the sub, I wasn't worried about it. Sophia Smith on for Rodman at 64. Even though there are stretches where you don't necessarily see Sophia Smith's impact, she gets into scoring position and she knows how to convert. We're going to talk more about that in a little while, but she is like that type of number 9. Lavelle on for Morgan at 72. She was making great passes. She was putting pressure on defenders. I'm going to add a little something about Lavelle here in a second. The last sub was Emily Sonnet on for Sam Coffey at 85. I was a little annoyed about this one too in the moment. Coffey comes off because I thought Coffey played great throughout the match, and she was hitting some fantastic corners. She had several, like trying to set up Haran. That Haran was kind of pushing wide. I think we'll talk about that a little later. Yep. But once I kind of did the math, I was like, oh, okay, Coffey's off, she's not going to be hitting the corners. But now we have Rose Lavelle on there, so now she'll take the corners.
Yep.
We should be okay there. So even though I had a raised eyebrow to 2 of those subs, turns out, even though Twyla Kilgore, I believe she listens to me on some of this stuff, and I agree with her on a lot of things, her managerial acumen might be stronger than mine. Jury's out.
Well, we'll see. Like I said, it's a team effort. So you just keep letting her know what you think, and hopefully, she follows through. I thought, that's an excellent point. I thought the U.S. substitutions were fucking genius. Casey Kruger for Neiswanger. I mean, I have to imagine that had to do with Kruger's like agility and ability to kind of like navigate the field. Neiswanger's probably more of like a precision ball skill type player. And just having Kruger out there and the zip that she had, she was flying around. And speaking of flying around, Lynn Williams, another one. Like you said, she was electric, pretty much chasing every ball, varying her attack. So it definitely kept that Canadian back line on their collective heels. And then the USA's other 3 subs, Emily Sonnet, Rose Lavelle, Sophia Smith, they all linked up on the Sophia Smith goal. So Sonnet pops one up for Rose Lavelle, who knew exactly what she was doing. She flicks it back behind her, right into the path of Sophia Smith. Perfectly placed ball between Canada's Vanessa Gilles and Gabby Carl. And Smith, fucking absolute no doubter. I was definitely hard on Sophia Smith earlier in the tournament, we'll say. I wasn't sure about her decision-making. Kind of felt like she was playing like the best player on a high school or a college team that's just miles better than everybody else. And it's like, I got this. And I think in this match, she definitely fit in to a role, and I think it was like, all right, when it was her time, flawless execution from her. We'll talk about what she did with the PK in a little bit here, but I just thought it's like great growth from her, in terms of like her game plan and her approach to this one. So yeah, Twyla Kilgore, I don't know, 5 for 5. I think that's fair to say.
I think so, and I think she went 5 for 5 in the last game. So she's on a hell of a hot streak with these subs. Totally right about Sophia Smith. Never a doubt when she took it. Full confidence, right in the like one of those that kind of like scrapes the side netting as it's going in. Yeah. Keeper never had a shot. Sheridan never had a chance to save it. So when you're a number 9, you might not get a bunch of chances. But like I've heard Gary Lineker talk about this, legendary number 9 for the English national team, Barcelona, et cetera, et cetera. When a number 9 doesn't score for like a few weeks, it's like, what's wrong with them? They've totally disappeared. And then when they get that conversion, everybody's like, oh yeah, that's right. They can do that. So good to see it happen for Smith.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that the Smith goal did was almost had us pull off one of the greatest tandem sports predictions in podcast history. I actually want to run the tape here from Monday's show. So let's check it out.
Give me one sports take chip, and I'm going to set it on the roulette wheel for USA wins 2-1, but you got to play 120 minutes of football to get there.
Ooh, I like that. Trying to think who gets it in extra time. Feels like maybe like a Sophia Smith.
That's
like a retribution.
We're mind melding.
There we go. I can see it. Comes on in the 70th. Maybe makes an error and kind of like redeems herself with a big goal at the end. That would be something. The only thing I think I got wrong there, I said Smith would come in around the 70th. She came in at around the 65th. So, hey, nobody's perfect. And then there was the small matter of the massive fucking jinx that we almost put on the team because I had to tweet that video before the end of the match. My fingers were on fire. I had to get it out onto the internet. We almost went down in history, buddy.
Speaking of the internet, I'm glad you put it on the internet because that needed to be heard after she scored. Because in true internet fashion, the DiCaprio meme where he's standing up and pointing at the television screen, I was like, oh my God, it's happening. We did it. Like we fucking nailed this. And I think you get more credit because Kilgore, she could have brought Smith on after halftime. She could have brought her in on the 55th. You were within 5 minutes of her being brought on. I think that counts, man. I thought that made the prediction better that you just kind of like offhand slid 70th minute in there and she brought her on at 65. If the ball doesn't go out of bounds, if we don't have to keep hitting the ball out of play every 5 fucking seconds because we're playing in a swamp, you might have nailed it even more directly.
I mean, did Twyla put Smith in a little early? I mean, who's to say? I think she might have.
Maybe.
But it's all right. She probably just didn't get to the episode soon enough either way.
Yeah.
So after the penalty, which was for sure a penalty,
yeah,
there's some parts of my brain that think about the football gods maybe making things right for the Davidson penalty that was missed earlier in the match. So after the penalty's called, you kind of knew Canada's going to make this and we're going to PKs. Like it just felt like that's where things were heading. Yep. Leon gets a pretty good strike on it. Not a perfect strike, but sends Nair the wrong way. 2-2, and we're off to the races. Now we go to PKs. I absolutely hated the decision to send Adriana Leon right back out there to take Canada's first PK, just because it's got to be so hard to beat a keeper twice in a row. Just mentally, it's like super taxing. I also went back and looked at Leon's first PK, and it was hit hard, but the placement was like halfway between the post and the center of the goal. So had Nair guessed right, she would have definitely stopped that first one too, and then the game ends 2-1. When Leon steps up to take the second one, which again, not sure why they sent her out back to back. I know you have the order kind of like preset, but these are some really weird match circumstances. I think I might have like in that huddle been like, all right, let's give you a chance to kind of decompress and not put all this pressure on you to kind of get a second one. Just staring down Alyssa Nair, trying to get her 2 in a row. That's got to be a fucking nightmare. Kind of predictably, she gets her PK stuffed by Nair. And then we get definitive proof that we're definitely living in a simulation, because outside of Quinn's tremendously well-struck PK, Haitama and Jessie Fleming both put both of their attempts in the exact same fucking spot that Leon's did. In like the same like halfway from the post to the center of the like it seemed like we always joke about like FIFA glitches. It felt like absolutely like a FIFA glitch. Like is this real life? Like where are we right now?
Yeah, I don't know if Nair got in their head or what. Like, I was also stunned. I was just like, the same spot? The Fleming one was finally where I was just like, Jesus Christ, 3 in the same spot. I don't know if they were staring it down, or you go out and you play golf and everybody hits a massive slice on their first tee shot, and you're just like, oh, there's a magnet over there. It's just like that's where the ball's going. Like I don't know what was going on, if it was all just Nair just giving everybody the death stare and then drilling her penalty, probably the most well taken penalty of the bunch, and then they're just like, oh, we got to beat this robot, this PK robot, and they just nobody had a shot. Except for, and just shout to Quinn again, like I say it every time I talk about them, like one of my favorite all-time Reign players. Quinn stepped up and buried that shit, and I knew they would.
Yeah, I mean, blasted it. But yeah, it's almost like they were like, yeah, Nair can't keep covering that exact same spot over and over. Either way, that spot in space and time owned by Alyssa Nair for that 6 or 7 minute stretch, enough to get the USA a big win in a match that I mentioned it earlier, felt like a toss-up.
Yeah.
You play that one 10 times, wouldn't be shocked if it went 5-5, 6-4 in either direction. But yeah, USA gets the win and they move on to the final.
It's a great win. Like you said, like I think we got to throw some of it out. I think that puts USA all time against Canada. I know Chris Whittingham on the call, he talked about it as a rivalry, and I know Canada has played USA tough. But if I remember the CBS Sports graphic correctly, I believe that now puts USA's all-time record at 54, 7, and 4 against Canada. So you could play tough in a lot of those L's, but man, doesn't sound like much of a rivalry to me.
Yeah. Reminiscent of Heat Celtics, if I've ever seen it. If you enjoyed hanging out with us, please subscribe. We are covering the sport every week here and into the channel. Podcast primarily about women's football. Coming up, we're going to dive into Brazil's big win over Mexico. We'll preview the CONCACAF W Gold Cup final going down Sunday night between the USWNT and Brazil. And we're going to go into the news, talk a little Ajax, talk a little Kika Nazareth, talk a little Braun versus UEFA, and of course, Baba Banda. So be sure to like if you liked and subscribe if you love the women's game as much as your boys do and want to hang out with us just a little bit more.
All right. Thanks for hanging out with us. We'll see you next time, weather permitting.